Today's topic, or I guess this year's topic, is migration from PI to PO, or whatever you call it. I guess the target is to SAP 7.5, and that is what everybody is need to be, because everything but 7.5 is not going to be supported in next year. So if you are on 7.4 or below, you need to migrate or upgrade. So some of the things is why do you need to get to 7.5. We'll cover do you need to migrate or upgrade. I guess that's always a good question about what makes sense in this perspective. What's the best approach for these things, and then we'll show you some of what you can do with the automated tool and what we have of options there. So the roadmap, I guess, yeah, as I said, everything but 7.5 ends support, and that means that you need to figure out how you can migrate to this to 7.5 in this year. And since you're here, I would assume you are still wondering how you can do a migration in this period of time. So yeah, and then PI 7.5 will end support in 2024. And then you have some next release of PI PO in the next year. Yes, dual stack, I guess, is also available on 7.5, so you can upgrade it to it, but it will need to split the stacks, and basically when I would assume that you anyway need, so I guess we can cover that in the other part here. So you can upgrade depending on what kind of version, what kind of risk you are able to achieve. So if you are on a dual stack PI system and are using both parts, you can obviously upgrade to 7.5. What it means that there will be a stack split, and in some cases you'd be able to delete the ABAP stack once you have migrated all of those to using the ICO based approach, and that's as one way to do it. I don't think I would recommend recommend an upgrade unless you are on really a simple ICO basis or have a small scenario and have really good testing of it, because if you're doing an upgrade, you have to go live with the full landscape in just one go. So and there's not really a good fallback if there's any problems, anything like that. It's you are kind of stuck with it. So the upgrade makes sense. If you can reuse your existing solution, you can run some good tests on it and ensure that it works. Then that is, well, it's probably the best approach if you are ready for this big go live and you don't have any major rework to do. The migration is a little less risky, but obviously has some other complexities into it. You need to install a full new landscape of all the SAP components. You need to figure out how you can install this and run it. It does give you the benefit that you can actually tune it and figure out what's the way you want to go with it. And I guess right now a lot of people are considering, should we move our S4 to cloud, Amazon Asia, whatever. Then it would also make sense that you install it in an Asia environment and move interfaces to it one by one. You can, the cool thing about a migration is you can go live with one interface at the time, so you can move it up, configure it, see how it works. If there's any problems, you have an option, depending on the scenario, to fall back on the old landscape. And it obviously requires a new set of servers, a new set of configuration, but that's probably a little simpler than the upgrade and stack split. And I guess with the dual stack, as we talked about, it is I guess it's supported in 7.5, but it is, I guess, not a recommended approach, because in the next release, when you need to migrate in 2020 or before 2020 or in 2020, you would anyway need to go away from it, because then, well, most likely dual stack will not be available there. Otherwise, you're anyway getting a lot of extra complexity about having an extra landscape running. So some of the problems with this is there's, if you have a lot of integrations, it's really difficult to get 6 months where you can just say, for the next 6 months we are not going to do any new projects, we will just migrate or upgrade or whatever we want to do. It's probably also a little challenging getting qualified resources to work on the migration. There is a lot of work involved in coordinating the testing, coordinating with business about, do we actually have this information, what's going on with them, and then it's about finding what's the good architecture. Obviously, if you're just moving interfaces and not doing any rework, it's pretty simple. If there are anything, for instance, if you have Seeburger B2B add-on and want to migrate away from it, it does add some complexity to the things that you have. I have this block. I don't know if I can actually copy this and put it into the chat. So on this block, I've collected a lot of the different resources on migration, upgrade versus a lot of other things. Where, trying to go through some of these different questions about processing. How do you actually get to understand what interfaces do you have on your system and how much are they running? What are the message mappings you have? So and how to plan a project, what's recommended or not. So there's a lot of technical things I do recommend going through that one. And with 2021 participants here, I guess it is something you know of. There's still, in the IFD survey that was conducted this summer, I think maybe 45% of people were still using PI less than 7.4. And I guess another challenge is that you got S4 projects going to start, and it is going to be a little interesting about how you're going to do that, or will that happen in parallel, or when are you going to upgrade these things. And obviously there was a large discussion yesterday about, do you actually need PI 7.5 to do an HANA project? But I think if you have any freeze period or something like that, it makes sense that you have the PI on the latest release. So if you're going to develop anything new, at least you can use the latest technology instead of having to rely on a CC BPM. Or at least get if you're doing the migration, you can always have your 7.5 system running and doing new development on that one. And then the old system that you're migrating from would then still be on that old landscape. So one thing we talked about is Seeburger migration, and I think how many of you guys have Seeburger? Just put it into the chat. It'll be interesting to see. So a lot of customers are using Seeburger to do EDI and stuff like that. EDI, X12, VDA, TraderCom, and it is the challenge is that there's two ways that you can get rid of this. Either you will create, so the structures of a B2B message versus a Seeburger is changed in some small ways around different areas, and that means you can either do one of two things. You can create a mapping from B2B to Seeburger structure, and then use that before or after your message mapping. It does add some complexity to a mapping, because you need to use this. Or the other approach is that you update the message mapping to use the Seeburger structure instead of the B2B add-on, and that's some manual work that is required for this. So let's just look at the two different structures. So the Seeburger structure starts with list, and the B2B structure starts with des.rv, for instance. Hope it's the same document I was trying here. Then we can see some of these are changed a little, and we can see down here, this one will go away, that the structure down here is different. So you would need to go through, figure out what are the fields that's different. What we have done is we've created a tool that is pretty simple. You can just go into it, select a source structure. So select the source structure, for instance this one. So let me just show it before I do a map conversion of it. So there we have it. So here we have it. It starts with list, as we can see. So it's a Seeburger structure. So we will go through here. We will convert it to a B2B structure. So, and as you can see here, now it will download it to the local client. This is a tool you can install on your laptop and run everything from it. So it's pretty simple to get started on. And now it has updated the mapping with that structure. So if we go into a change list, let's need to close this. Check out our change list. We can see someone has put it in here, and we can then see now the mapping has been updated with it. So the only thing we'll need to do is edit and save, and then it's been compiled and it is a Seeburger structure. It will not replace user-defined functions, but they would stay as they are. So yeah, it's a pretty simple process to handle these different kind of things. And now that was it. So that was it on Seeburger. There's a, you pay for a package or per mapping. It's 100 euros per mapping. It's just a one-time fee. And if you got a lot of mappings, there's obviously a discount on it. So depending on the mapping you want to use, you can see how to get this. If you want to try it out, you can go to figaf.com/SMT and try it out. Now for the migration projects. So if you have migration projects, you probably see that there's a lot of manual steps, as we talked about you needing to maintain the systems, what's going on, what are the challenges with this. And I think it makes sense to have an automated tool. Obviously, SAP has provided a tool that enables you to do migration, and it does work really well. But one of the challenges is that you still need to maintain the process, manage the process, figuring out how to copy or configure communication channels to the full landscape, configure passwords, and ensuring you have tested all the interfaces properly, and that is the reason why it makes sense to have an automated tool that can handle this process. So it also enables you. So normally you would just do export of the software component to the new one. With this, it will just take the objects that you're actually using, so you're not getting moving objects that was just created as a part of a test or anything like that. So that is what we have created as a part of this. The way it works is you have your own old landscape, and the system will then connect to it. It will connect to the new landscape that you have created, and then you have the option to migrate objects or interfaces one by one to the new system. You would then be able to fetch test data, for instance, from your productive system and run them on your development system. And that is the way that you can properly accept that messages is, or that the interface is working as it's expected. So there's 2 steps into this process. One is to migrate to the new system, and the second one is to development, that is moving in the new landscape. So if you have any questions, just put it into the chat, and I'll try to cover these. I hope you can find the chat box. It should be here in the menu. Then, so in the migration, first off, we will set up and find test data, and then we will create a test case for these messages. Then we will copy repository objects to the new system, copy configuration channel, or create the communication channels, and then we will migrate the ICO. Yeah, I'll see if I can share these after the presentation, the slides. And then the second part is development, that is a test that the thing we have developed is okay, transport it, and possibly have approval, configured in QA, configured in production, or configured run test in QA and configured in production. So let's see how this works. So the way we have done this is the GAF ERT tool. And what we have done in here is we have connected it to some different systems. So we have created all these different agents, that is GAF agents about or standard PI systems, and at different versions, that is enabling us to fetch and try out messages. What it's also doing is it's downloading all repository and directory object, and with that we have an option to see what was the things that were changed in a given scenario. So we can see something here was changed 3 times. So on this we have an option to actually see what was changed behind this. So a description was added, I guess, is the main thing here, and maybe some other things in it. So it was changed for some specific reason. But this allows actually to see what has happened as a part of a change, and we then have the option to assign a change to a ticket, and that means that if someone else will be looking at what has been done to a scenario, we will actually see, there's actually a ticket here on this scenario, so we can actually see why this was changed. So it was as a part of a demo, and we can see all the other objects that was also affected by this ticket. So that is our agent. So we have all this information about the systems. Then we have defined some landscapes. And in these landscapes, we have specified what are the systems, in which order they appear. We have, in some cases, reviewers, so we can see who has the ability to approve items in these things. So we have created, so the first thing is we will create a release, and our release is a way of grouping interfaces in a logical order. So when I'm normally talking about migrations, I recommend that you take some like proof of concepts that covers a little differently in your landscape. Not super critical, but as a way to see, Does everything work out? Do our tooling processes in place? And you will put it into a wave. Then you will do some more critical ones or some high volumes ones. And then at the end, you'll just take the last couple of interfaces. But obviously, depending on what you can migrate, what the business is, and stuff like that. So we have created a ticket here, and we have configuration. So the old landscape is this, the new landscape is this, and this is our migration path from this C73 to our DI3. And what we'll do is we will add a new scenario. So we can add a scenario. We can add if there's any test cases on it. We can add it, so let's just try this one, D4. And now we can see we have 3 interfaces in prepared. We have 2, 3, and 4. We can switch to this perspective that's called ticket, and here you can just see information about a specific instance. So we will look at this one. We will check out, do we have any test cases on it? We don't, for some specific reason, or for the reason we haven't created it. So it will be a good practice to create test cases from this, so you can use it in this testing, or once you test. So you test on the development system if possible. We do have some scenarios where it's not possible, where you just want to migrate and use on a new system. So we will then say, okay, now we move to development. We have prepared everything. We got our test data. And then in the development perspective, you can go in and see the same information. You can start a transport, and the transport will then fetch all the repository and all the directory data that is needed as a part of this this process, create separate transports on it that you can then use. And the reason it is a bit slow is it is coming from our slow performing Amazon service long way away, and that takes a little bit of the performance out of it. So let's see if they have actually been created yet. Not yet. So yeah, it takes a little while, but it will figure out, based on all the objects that we have for this specific case, what are the transports that we need to create. So it will create file export of the relevant system. So no need to use CTS plus. And obviously it takes a little little longer. So now we got our first transport, and so this is the interface one, so we can see all the components that it has. And what we can then do is we can just import it on our DI3 system, which is our new development system. And yeah, then this is being processed. We can see we got the other one also created. So this is the mapping component, and we'll then create it with all the relevant information, so you don't need to care about it. And the last thing we can see is we got the directory component, and this one we have an option here to say migrate passwords if possible. And here it will then see, are there any passwords that we can migrate, and we have the option to validate transport, so it will see what needs to be done. And this screen is a little different because here you actually have option to do configuration, and in this configuration you can specify what values should apply in the different systems. So that means that you can take all the non-transportable objects, and here we can see that it has migrated the password. But we could also go in and say, okay, we need to change some of these parameters because that makes sense for our specific business reason or whatever. So it will take all of these things. And this is a concept that we're using also in the transport when we're transporting in the new landscape. So So developers actually would not need to have access to your QA or productive system, because everything would be managed inside of these transports. So we can then import it here, and it will then run the configuration, create the configuration on the DI3 server. Import. Hopefully it will work. Yeah, and here it's using the directory API to create these objects. So that gives us some flexibility. We obviously also have mapping between software component or business systems and stuff like that, because they are obviously changing along the way. And this is another great slow Amazon system. So it does some post synchronization, and with this it will then know what has actually been applied for it. So now everything has been imported, and here we also have the option to see what's the different revisions that we have for this. So now we can go back to our ticket. We can say we can resolve it, and that means we have now, if we go back to our release, we can then see we have migrated one ticket for this specific case. And what we can then do is we can migrate configuration, and this will then take all the communication channels in the new landscape and handle the migration there. So if you have partner names, host names that are different in the new landscape, you can run them there. So now we have copied that, we will create our development ticket. And now we have our development ticket. So now we have created a ticket that handles the migration in the new system. And here we can see it's obviously added the same object from source system DI3. If we had test cases, they will also be applied here. I'll just cover testing again, and then we can start the transport. Create transports in just the same way as we did before. Transport and import it in the new system. And yeah, transport here, before we can transmit, we will need to approve, because this landscape, the development landscape, is set up to handle transports, or to require approval before it can actually be done. So let's see if they're here. Any questions along the way? I think we'll cover testing a little more. That is one of the big things, and obviously you can use it with or without the tool. And then here we can see we got these things. One cool thing is we have here an option that can simulate or try to simulate what happens if once we apply this scenario. So that means you as an architect or whoever is in charge of approving this can actually see what's actually being changed as a part of this this transport. We can send it to approval, and then if the user or in the landscape you're defining who has access to approve it, you can approve it or not, and then the developer can then import it in the new system. So one thing I just wanted to check is on this channel, one of the things we do have here, as we can see, is that the old path was dev orders, and the new path in the productive system is prod orders. So, and then we can import this and everything looks okay. So let's just cover testing and how we're creating test data. So the way we're creating test data is following. So you select one or more interfaces that you want to say, okay, that, yeah, you want to take data from these things. So you would say, okay, these are the interfaces that is important. you will then create a test suite where you will put this in. It could either be for a specific system or for a specific process, so it could be finance. You then have the option to specify some message information and some partner information if that is relevant. So if you have a lot of orders from one partner, you can trim that down so you're getting somewhat a more equal comparison between the different components. And then it's just about setting this up. It will then add modules because this is an ICO based testing approach. We are currently in the process of adding an option to fetch messages from a dual stack system, where it will look in the log that you have created, and in there all the messages that are processed, that will take up messages so you can see and use those as a part of the test case. So let's see. Normally it will take a couple of minutes and there should be a message being processed. Alright. Francis, what do you mean with the difference between export results? So if you're looking at, I guess what you're meaning is, can you actually show these things that you have created as a part of this this ticket? So we were looking at these different. So you cannot export these, but you would anyway at a later point in time. You would then be able to actually go to the object and see all the revisions of this. So here you can see this has been changed as a part of all of these different scenarios. And yeah, and then you can go in specifically at the different versions and see what has been changed between these. So you have the option to drill down and see specifically when something was changed. Good. So let's see if this one was created successfully. Yes. So now we can see we got some messages, and the way we're testing is for dual stack. We have created some small custom modules that you can add on the SAP system. It will then handle logging or log to a JMS queue that the GAF tool can then fetch these messages in. And once it has processed the message, it will then create test cases for it. And you can see where this reside. You can then drill into it. You can see some of these different data on it. You can read specifically what's the input of this payload. And just so we know that we will get some errors, we will then specify that, so let's just remember this is line number 4. Oh, edit. So we'll remember that line ID number 4 should be there. So now we have updated our test case, and obviously, yeah, you can do that, but I guess in most cases you would not really do it. So we can then run it on a specific system. And this makes sense. So if you have created a test case, for instance, on your old productive system, you can then run it on your new development or QA system as a part of the testing process. Now I cannot remember which one I was into. Hopefully it wasn't this one. Maybe this one. So here we can see we're getting an error, and we can pretty easily see it was expecting 20. We had changed that value manually, so now it is actually saying, hey, the result is 20. So that means there was a difference. We know what the difference is in this case. So what we can actually go in and do is we can go in here and then we can say, okay, now this is actually what we're expecting this to be. So if we run it again, we will see that everything would be successful. So this also means that if you're adding new elements and stuff like that to your mapping, you have your test cases, they would give an error. You can then run them and you would see, this is actually running out and giving these expected results. So let's just try. One thing just before we do that, we can view result. We also have an option here to download a report that shows everything that has been going on. Here we can see what the errors are, and we also have an option to switch on and say, okay, so here we can see the specific error between these two documents. So this gives you a good overview. You also have an option to switch and say, okay, just create it with all the test cases you have. That means you will be able to see specifically what kind of messages that you've tested, how many that you have tested, and if it has information about the partners or anything like that, you'd also see it here. So here we have the partner ID. Yeah, so we're adding this to be able to fetch messages from a dual stack system. So it was number 2 results. So now we can see everything on this was successful. If you have scenarios where you're migrating from something else, you can also create test cases manually. Where I would say, okay, put it into this specific test suite that we created. And then in here you can add the in and the outbound message of it, or you can upload it as a zip file. So if you're taking all the in and outbound messages from something, you have 1,000 messages, you can extract them and then you can use it in this format. So if you have that kind of information, that will also be useful to create the test cases, and you can then run them as everything else. And then, as you saw, so obviously it makes sense to have it as a part of the migration, but also in a continued development process, it does make sense to have this, because you can use it for the transport. You have this option of giving users access to run configurations for specific scenarios. And that means, no developers will need access in QA or in QA and production. And that simplifies the management. You can, so for instance, if this was a Jira task that we got, or whatever ticket, we can then create a report like this. We can then add this to Jira and saying, hey, this was the issue. These are all the changes that we have as a part of this. These are all the objects that we have changed as a part of this. We have what are the different versions, test cases that we run, what is the error results of these things, and what kind of transports did we actually do as a part of this process. So you'll use it to migration, and then hopefully you'll also be using it afterward, because you have this option of seeing what needs to be changed as a part of this. Any questions or comments on this this process? So the way we are testing is we are adding a module. That means you would be able to test all the modules that you have. We don't have a way to include adapter modules as a part, or custom adapter modules as a part of it, we do have the option to see that they are there, and we actually have a place also that this is actually that we can see which kind of modules you have in your system and how well they're used. We have this report that's called used report, and this will then look at the messages that has been processed on the system. And then it will go through all of these messages. It will create a report like this from a scenario perspective. What are the messages that is included? What's the successful and error messages on this one? And then you can go all the way to operation mappings and message mapping. So here we can see we have a message mapping, this message mapping that is called 28,000 times. And we can also see how many test cases I think we have on it. So number of test cases is the last part. Here, as a part of this, we also have the report that shows you what are the modules that is used, how often, or which communication channels are they used on. So it will show the first couple of messages and how many times it's actually been run, both for sender receiver. But yeah, we don't have it because I guess that would be something you would handle in the SAP development infrastructure. So custom modules. Do you manage backends? So we don't manage the backend. We don't care about the backend. So that is the approach that we have taken, that we want to test everything inside of the PI system is successful. So we just want to see is adapter modules, routing, operation mappings, and outbound or receiver modules, are they in order? And if they are, then that is what we're testing. So we don't care about if the data can be delivered to the target system, and we have options that you can say, okay, we don't want this or the messages from this test case to be sent to the partner because either the system does not exist or it cannot handle the load that you have on testing, or you're paying per message that's delivered on this specific system. But I think this report is actually really useful when you're sitting in a migration, trying to understand how many methods and operation mappings do we have and what's going on in it. Good. We don't have an API for these things. We have a few APIs for it, but if there's any customer request on specific data that needs to be exposed, we can obviously expose this one. We obviously need to expose some data for the ticket, so you can connect it with Jira or Solman or whatever you have for managing your bigger process, because this will obviously never replace Solman or Jira, but it will just be a way that simplifies your documentation of the changes. So let's see. I hope you could see how the tool works, what kind of functionality we have in it. So we are currently looking at to see if it's able to migrate from something older than 731 that we have currently been using as our target system, and then if we need to fetch data from or manage Seeburger migrations or something like that. I don't think we will support dual stack migration because it's a little too complex, and I think the built-in is pretty good. But what you can then do is you can migrate the dual stack scenarios and then use the tool as just a development tool to move along the landscape. And I think we will also do something about being able to fetch configurations from older system. So the way this is licensed is the license per migration that you're creating. We are still working on what's the ideal way to do it, but it's something per ICO that you're migrating, and if you have a couple of 100 interfaces, we can do it at a good price. Installation. So the GAF tool can run on a laptop. You probably need something with some memory on. I think, if 1.5 to 2 GB of free memory is good. Obviously, it does take a little longer than if you have a server. But for a proof of concept, a laptop is pretty good. If you want to use it to in a environment with multiple developers, scalable, then we have a couple of server installations options that we can use, and it takes probably 10 minutes to install these small modules on the components. You can download the tool at gaf.com/IoT. Then you'll get a license key. You can install the system with this license key, and then you can start playing around with it and see how the migration works, how all of these different components works. So the built-in one that you can get started on your laptop is an H2, so you don't need to do anything with that. We support Postgres, Microsoft, Oracle, and DB2 as the productive databases we support. And obviously a good solution is to run it in a cloud and then have their managed databases for it, because then you don't need any resources on managing databases. Try it out, gaf.com/IoT. You can get some free trial, and I hope that we'll get a beta next week on our dual stack message fetching, so you can see how well it will function in that place. Any questions? I guess that was all I wanted to share with you today. I hope this has been helpful, and that you could see this could streamline your process. It could streamline your testing, because I think testing is one of the biggest challenge. How do you involve the business in testing these things? Because in most cases, business really don't care about you doing a migration. They just care about that the interfaces are running steadily without any problems. So that was all I wanted to share. Put questions into the chat, or I can also allow you to unmute yourself. So BPMs are not managed by this. We have support for CPI, and I think in a lot of cases you probably want to manage CPI or use CPI instead of PI BPMs. But BPMs is also delivered normally via the deploy API, which we don't really understand and can do versions of. So it's I guess it would make sense if we had that kind of capability. You could upload your local development to the GAF or to a Git repository, and the GAF could handle the building and deploying it. But for now, we don't have that option. Francis, what do you mean with a data name translator? You can unmute yourself, or should be able to.
Yeah, for testing, you have like production-specific values, and then in test it would have a different, let's say, ID or a name.
Yep.
And then when you do comparisons, it gets to ignore that somehow.
So in the payload, you have the option to ignore elements. Oh, oops. So once we are here, if we look at our test runs, for instance, here, we can see we got this test case here that failed. We can view our results. We can go in here, say diff, and we know, okay, this is actually something that's changing, or we don't know. We can just say ignore that, and then it will not accept that as an error. So it will just say, hey, there's no error on the specific line item. So is that so that is one thing. And then obviously you can say, okay, now I've run it. I know that it in this specific case is printing whatever dev instead of prod, and then you'll say, okay, now that's our new target test cases. Is that what you're asking?
Yep, that's
okay.
basically it.
And then obviously we have the mappings of systems name, so you can map all the SAP system to newer systems or to other clients or whatever you need in the different landscapes. So our license costs. So if you want the testing for 100 ICOs, it's 10,000 euros a year. And if you want the DevOps, and the DevOps is the part about, so testing is obviously just testing. If you want the DevOps, this is the one where you have tickets. You can document what you've made of changes. You can transport and manage them along the way. Then it's 15,000 euros. And then if you expand it, you can get packages with more than that. So it depends on the number of integrations that you have for using the tool. We do not have support to migrate to CPI yet. We do consider different options, but there is some objects that I need to create before I'm able to create a good migration tool to CPI. But we do have the same functionality for managing CPI, testing CPI iFlow. So next week or the week after, I'll create a DevOps focused based on PI and one on CPI about how you can deliver integration faster with the tool also. So taking this approach about having test data, having documentation of the processes, and understanding what's being changed, creating all the documentation that's required for it. Yeah, and I guess there's a lot of different things we didn't manage to go through. We also have an option to do anonymization, and have a lot of different options on it. So you can take some test data and then put some random stuff into the incoming documents. Use that as a way of testing, so you can test on purchase orders. And we are currently working on a solution also to fetch or to use data in an anonymized way throughout the full testing process. So you can take your confidential order data and just test with that, or sales report, whatever, all these cool things. Deborah, or whatever. Was that enough on the licensing? If you send me the number of ICOs or then yeah, we can do more on that, and the number of migrations you have. Okay, cool. Yes, and if you want, we can do a specific webinar with you, your team, and managers about showing how these things could be relevant in that case. There's also support, automation, stuff like that. So there's a lot of other cool features inside of it that make sense.